Hey, I'm Mira Whisper. Welcome to my corner of the internet, where I dive into games, stories, and everything in between. I'm glad you're here. Today, let's talk about KCD2, mainly about the combat and why the combat quirks me as much, while I should love it as a historical fencer myself. I am working on a full review of the game, but I really needed to vent my thoughts on the combat so far, as to not really lose too much time on it in the actual review video. So here are my thoughts. Now first things first, let's put credit where credit is due. The combat in this game looks absolutely stunning. The animations are amazing, it looks deadly, it looks effective, it looks elegant, and most of all, it does look realistic. You do see the moves that you see whenever you are actually fighting with the sword yourself, and I can confirm that as somebody who does a little bit of historical fencing. The armor in the game feels realistic. It is really a plate armor, chain armor, you name it. You do not cut somebody in half with the sword. You see some impact if the person is unarmored, but when they have plate armor, you will have much harder job to do, and that same goes for Henry. Like if you equip your armor, you are much harder to die than if you just try to run in unarmored and take on the group of enemies, for example. That's almost always a quick sentence to death. With all that said, why does the combat then feel so clunky, so player unfriendly, so rigid? Now, if we compare this to the first game, which had the similar problems in regards of combat, and I would say in this game the combat is a little bit more simple. They added some new stuff. They added crossbows and guns, which are very effective if you hit something with it, even though it takes approximately 2 business days to reload. But its historical accuracy, crossbows were hard to reload, much harder than bows. And guns, you had to put in the black powder, you had to put in the bullets, you had to mix it all together, and then you had to lighten it up, and you basically had just a miniature hand cannon to use against your enemies. It was shit to aim with. And it's all well and good. And then they added the polearms as an actual weapons. So it seems great, right? In the first game, the polearms, you just grab polearms somewhere and use it. In this game, you can have it as your own weapon in your inventory. You can buy the best ones, etc. So far, good. But then we get to an actual combat. Now, as you can see here, we still have this sort of crosshair that signifies in which side we are going to be attacking from. In the previous game, it was also where we are blocking from, but now we have basically ability to do perfect block everywhere. And yes, you will be perfect blocking, you will be doing riposts, you will be dodging around as much as you want, but that's all where the good stuff actually ends. So my first issue is that everybody, and what you see on the video right now, these are tough bandits, right? These are some of the most tough badasses in the game that I've encountered so far. They are not even, they are much tougher than endgame enemies, for example. But every enemy you encounter, including like the common rabble without armor, with like sticks, they will have this perfect fencing stance. They will have perfect blocks. They will be just doing stuff that experienced fencer would do, not just some common untrained rabble would do against you. And what we can see here is that the parry riposte game, you can do perfect block and follow it with a parry, but especially towards the end game, every single enemy will immediately perfect block you and counter parries. So they will be playing parry riposte game with you for a very long time, which is deadly, especially as you can see here in the swarm of enemies that are against you. This can be really quite deadly. I think I'm going to even die here. Yeah, hear this. dying against many enemies is not an issue, right? That's historically accurate. The problem is how clunky it is to actually fight against more than one enemy. And from the combat standpoint, the autolock is what I think is the biggest issue, because it is very restrictive. And while throughout the autolock, where Henry just facing one enemy and just stares at him as a bulldog, you cannot actually control what enemies around you are doing, which you would do in real fight, especially to keep the distance. So that is something that I'm absolutely lacking in the game, you know, the ability to look around you without losing your bind, quote unquote, bind with the enemy you are facing right now. You know, to know to which side you should be dodging, to know if there is somebody around you, somebody behind you, where you are actually going, etc. It's not there because autolocking is preventing you from doing those things, and I have a huge problem with that. Now, another issue is, and I think this is something that makes the game even worse, in my opinion, is master strike. So at certain point of the game, quite early actually, you learn something that is called master strike. And master strike is, we can see examples on the video, it's not in the clip right now, but we have seen it before. These are very powerful strikes where you actually attack instead of blocking against the enemy. And if you do it correctly, you will do a hit that is doing high damage, and no enemy can block it. There is no way to defend against it. Enemies can do it against you as well, so that's something to have in mind, but you know how to use it without them to actually use it against you, because there are specific conditions to trigger it. So you can avoid enemies using it against you, and you can instead use it against them to dispatch them quickly. This technique, however, can be used only with swords, and it works despite armor being realistic. Most of the time it works against people with armor. You basically, even if you have heavily armored enemy like this, you can dispatch them in approximately 3 hits with your master strike. So that's something to keep in mind. With this, why would you use polearms even if they are new? Why would you use maces against armored enemies if you can still abuse the master strike, right? There is no reason to, and especially how clunky the combat is otherwise, there is not really incentive to use anything else but swords. And I think the game is really biased towards using swords, especially giving you quite early also the sword of Siroratsik Kobila. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. And then you can reforge this sword and making effectively the best sword in the game quite early. And I haven't been using anything else unless I wanted to level up something. I have been using this sword. It was very powerful, and in combination with master strikes I was able to very easily overcome any enemy that I wanted to do. So other weapons, they feel lacking in comparison to swords. Now another thing, whenever enemy is doing a repose, they will teleport to you. Literally, they teleport to you with their strike, no matter the distance, which is stripping away the crucial thing that every sword fighting scenario should have, and that is distance awareness. Right? If I am at a good distance, I don't even need to parry because the opponent simply cannot reach me. Well, not in Kingdom Come Deliverance. They just magically appear just at the right angle and right distance to strike you, even if you were keeping your distance with a polearm and, let's say, backing up with a parry, with a counter thrust. They parried you, and with repose they just teleport to you and hit you. So again, you can use parry and repose game, or you can just get hit, which is something that is not really realistic, and it really breaks the immersion, and I think it's stupid. Now, another thing that game features is dodging. Instead of block, you can essentially dodge, and there is a perfect dodge in the game that guarantees you will dodge the enemy, and it will cost you next to nothing in terms of stamina, so you can use it all the time. However, it does basically nothing because it's the very same thing as parrying is, and even if you change your direction towards enemies, they will still be able to immediately parry any attack that you launch at them, even if you are at their flank, for example, which makes like both parrying and dodging at this point is kind of pointless. Just use master strikes. There's really no real opening that dodging can give you, and there is like one exception where dodging is useful, and that is when you dodge backwards, create space, and then you can run away to better position. But that's like the only real solution for dodge, or only reasoning for dodge I could come up with when playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. So keep that in mind. So that is quite a lot, and I would say that combat looks great, but it really not. It really doesn't play great. It's playing like okay, but despite the game being so heavily focused on knights and fencing and all that, I've never felt like excited about my next combat situation, about my next like combat encounter. Even if I'm usually just trying to seek those out in slow-paced RPG to level up a little bit more, I wasn't really excited about it in the Kingdom Come Deliverance. I wasn't disgusted by it, no, not by any means. But it's like, if you say the combat is just okay, then in a game that is otherwise almost 10 out of 10, it really feels even heavier. It's even heavier impact, right? And you would just solve most of the combat with like shooting a bow because of how boring it is just using master strikes, or any other weapon that is not really efficient and it doesn't really work well against enemies. But like, let's give the game some credit here. So I'm gonna check my notes, and like the animations, as I said, the animations are top tier. It looks cinematic, it looks fluid, and it really just binds all of those movesets together in sort of. It would be better if the combat was like automatic and you would be just watching the animation based on the stats, because it is just it just looks that great. It just looks that beautiful. And I gotta give that. It's like it does feel like you're actually sword fighting. Same with armor. You know, if the enemy is clad in armor and you don't have like weapon that you can do master strikes with, well, have fun. It's going to be a long fight. If the enemy has no head protection, you just bonk them over the head and then they die. So, yeah, it really is like good. I have no complaints there. You can do your master blocks, you can do your perfect blocks, perfect dodges, all of that stuff. You can add this into the mixture, but as I said, with enemies that are actually teleporting towards you, any sort of distancing actually goes out of window, even though every HEMA enthusiast will tell you that distancing is crucial part of any duel, so keep that in mind. Again, new weapons, they added a lot of new weapons, and crossbows are kind of fun. The guns were kind of fun as well, but in my experience, you have one shot and then everybody is running at you if you use the gun. So I wasn't using guns much, but it was cool. They were there, they are historically accurate, and we are nearing the Hussite Wars. Well, not nearing, the Hussite Wars will follow in like 15 years from Henry's story, but still. So that's about it. To wrap it up, again, the combat is visually stunning, but the balance is kind of off the table with Master Strike, and really, whenever you're facing multiple opponents, it's not impossible to do, but it's not like get good situation. It's more like use those cheap tricks, use Master Strike, just keep those enemies in line, which is something you can do. And I understand that people who has no idea how, let's say, fight against multiple people would work in a real life, quote unquote, sword fighting scenario, and they wouldn't try to create that space. They wouldn't try to position enemies in a way that you are fighting with one and he is blocking the other ones, holding choke points, that sort of stuff. Then they will be quickly overwhelmed and they might think that the combat sucks because they played like Diablo or whatever hack and slash comes to mind, where you have a lot of these AoE attacks, etc. But sadly, there is no like Montante that you would be able to flank around in in the Kingdom Come Deliverance, the best thing you can get is like a long sword, and that's far from two-hander. So yeah, that's about it. Now, I think this is all, and I really didn't wanted to make a video like this, but it's just the game is really great. It is the perfect game for me, and due to that, it hits even more that combat can feel like it is challenging, but it is not like get good situation in terms of Dark Souls where you just play and get stronger. It is more of get better gear, get better stats, learn how to use Master Strike, and you can just dominate. But it's not really some sort of skill ceiling. It's more of a stat check sometimes, and it's more of a just use OP move, or just use if you fancy yourself a hammer, you can use a hammer. If you fancy yourself a poleaxe, you can use a poleaxe. But you need to keep in mind that whenever there are multiple enemies, you will have a problem, and it's kind of making yourself or making the game harder for yourself for no reason. And also the restriction whenever you are auto-locked on an enemy and unable to look around, that is literally hurtful, and that really like ruins my fencing experience in the game for me. But if you can look past that and just focus on how great the moveset is done, both from first perspective, meaning Henry is doing the moveset, and from perspective of enemies. Like, sometimes I just go in a clinch with an enemy just to see how he pushes me back, gives me like a fist with his plated gauntlet, and then grasp his sword and just mordhouse me over the head. And it's all animated so fluently and so like vividly that it's just it's just pleasing to the eye to watch these animations. So they really did have nice consulting. I think the Adorestea was making all of the fencing choreography for them. So this is well known and very positively reviewed fencing group from Czech Republic. So of course they made a great job, and I'm glad that the animations are showing it. This is no Hollywood bullshit. It's just it doesn't play that well. But anyway, what do you think? Do you agree with me, or did you enjoy the combat more? I don't know. I would like to hear some opinions about that, because I really didn't want to bash on the game that I love so much, but I just had to get this out of me. This frustration from Master Strike right here, and the enemy is finished, and the animation is brutal, is beautiful. But what is the point of using anything else? That's my whole point. Anyway, thanks for watching. I've been rambling for long enough. I will try to make the review of the game very soon. Until then, I'll see you